Okay, so today I'm going to make some bases. I'm going to make a base for this Big Figs K2SO, and I'm also going to paint and make a base for this Jack Pacific Ben Affleck Batman that I went ahead and painted, and I put a different cape on him. So I've customized both of these, but you can also do smaller bases for smaller figures, and I picked these up. This one was $6, or no, sorry, this one was $3 because it was not sanded. They had routed the edge, but they didn't sand it. So I saved myself about $3-4 to just spend about 5 minutes just sanding off the rough edges. This one was fully finished, so I didn't have to do any sanding. All I have to do is paint it. And then on this one, I'm going to put the symbol of the Rebel Alliance. And on this one, I'm going to put the symbol of the Ben Affleck Batman. And to make the symbols, I'm going to use some black vinyl that I picked up at a craft store. This is meant to go in a laser cutter, but I don't have a laser cutter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out my design from this with scissors, and I'll show you a way I figured out how to do this to make it easier. It's somewhat hard to draw it on and cut it because the vinyl naturally wants to curl, but I figured out a way using some packing tape, and we'll get to that in a minute, to help flatten it out so you can cut it. And then I'm going to seal it off with some lacquer, and both of these are going to be painted just by hand with some brushes and some craft paint. Don't even need to spray paint it. So for the K2SO base, I went ahead and mixed together some paint, some acrylic craft paints here. I just mixed a little bit of metallic blue with some dark purple and some eggplant purple. And I'm just going to go ahead and start brushing this on. In the center, I'm going to paint purple. And the edges are going to end up probably just black, with the Rebel Alliance symbol going in the middle. And this acrylic craft paint sometimes takes a lot of coats to get it to look nice and even and solid, but it's a little easier to use, and I almost feel like it's meant to be used on wood. So you're probably not going to need any more than a coat or so, especially since we're going to go through and lacquer it. Also, with the less that you put on here, the more you get to see the wood grain. So if you don't want a metallic look to it, and you like the wood grain, which I do, you can just go ahead and put one coat on. If you want more of a sort of a flat, shiny, metallic look to it, you may want to sand this some more first, and then maybe just plastic dip it. Make sure this is nice and even, and all the paint isn't too thick in one area or another. And then that's done. Now for the Batfleck base, I'm going to take some metallic silver craft paints. All these craft paints are rather inexpensive, depending on where you buy them. They're $1.50 to $2.50. And I'm going to do a couple coats of the silver on it. Takes a little bit longer with metallic paint versus the regular paint to build up. But I'm going to do metallic silver first, and then I'm going to do an overspray with some craft paint, or sorry, not craft paint, with some gray plastic dip. And I'm not going to put it on in a solid layer. I'm just going to sort of pebble it on, spray it on a beaded texture, so that I can go ahead and when that dries, it'll have a texture to it that'll hopefully be pebbled and not so smooth like a K2SO base. Okay, I'm going to let this dry. I'm going to give it a couple more coats, and then we'll come back and I will do the plastic dipping. And I don't know how often you use acrylic craft paints or any sort of craft paints in wood, but anytime I paint this, I always go the brush strokes with the direction of the grain. See, the grain of the wood is running this way, so I'm painting this way. Okay. Okay, so I've stretched out my vinyl here and got it as flat as possible by sitting something on this end and using this random 4-pack of canvases I had to hold down the other end. So this is as flat as I can get it. And I'm going to be taping down this bat flag symbol and this Rebel Alliance logo. Now both of these I just printed out on my computer on regular white paper, and I took and cut them out very slowly and meticulously. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some packing tape to tape these on here, and that'll help make these a little bit flatter. And what I did was I just cut around my pattern, and I'm going to tape it printed side down. So I have the white here as a good guide to slowly and meticulously cut this out of the vinyl. And while your vinyl is flat, you just put your logo or whatever you want to cut out of it on it. And when you seal it down with this packing tape, it helps to hold it flat. And it's a little tricky as you're cutting it though, because as you cut this around the edge of your design here, it starts to curl back up again. Just keeps wanting to return to that shape. Now, if you have a laser cutter at home, of course, you don't have to do any of this stuff. But I don't have one and don't know anybody that has one. My idea is this is kind of like a more simplified, dumbed down version of the bases that I've seen made on a channel by a guy named Cosplay Chris. And he has a friend apparently that has a CNC machine that can just CNC cut acrylic. So he just takes solid black acrylic and has it CNC cut. But I don't know anybody like that, and I don't have that kind of money. So I'm just going to take mine, tape them down, and then cut them out. Okay, here they are all taped up. And I used this technique once already with this actual pattern. This is the second time that I've taped this down to be cut out here. And the first time I cut this out was to make a decal for the hood of my car. And here's the decal on my car. And you can see here I've cut around the pieces just so I don't have all this stuff hanging off as I cut it off. And you can see they're not completely flat, but they have stayed relatively flat with the packing tape on them now in comparison to this actual vinyl. The second you pick it up, it just curls back up, and it's so hard to try to cut with scissors. But putting this tape on it definitely helps keep it flat. Alright, now I'm going to very meticulously cutting this out. Both of these out, following my pattern that I've taped on here as closely as possible. this is something good you can do while you're waiting for your coats of paint to dry. Now, luckily, both of these symbols are relatively straightforward, so there is not a whole lot of crazy cuts involved. If you would want to do something like the Imperial logo, for example, from Star Wars, or even the Superman logo, probably going to need a lot more patience and an X-Acto knife, is all I can say. But for simple things like this Batman design, or the Rebel Alliance logo, this works pretty good. And if you don't want to go through all this hassle, a lot of little kiosk stores in the malls have laser cutters for vinyl graphics. And if you are going to do that, make sure your file is appropriately sized. And I would take whatever piece you're going to use as the base, just so you can make sure that it is that what you're paying for is going to fit, so you don't have to go back and forth to the mall and check that over and over again. But this is an easy, crafty DIY way to avoid having to spend that money. And these vinyl rolls usually cost around $8. The craft store that I went to pick up the vinyl roll was Hobby Lobby. And they always are running sales and have a 40% off coupons. With the 40% off coupon, I think this cost me less than $5 with tax for this whole roll of vinyl. I still have 3/4 of the roll left, and I've used it so far to make multiple things like this, including the hood ornament or the sticker on the hood of my car, which was the original reason why I bought it. And I've even went as far as trying to lay a book or something on the vinyl to get it flattened out, and it just doesn't work. Okay, so now that that's done, just have to remove carefully the printed logo from the vinyl here. Careful that you don't peel the vinyl completely off the paper. And you're going to notice here, when I peel this off, that the vinyl immediately goes right back to curling up. Okay, now I'm going to repeat this process with the Alliance logo, and we'll come back and check on our paint jobs and apply the decals. Okay, I went ahead and painted the edge of this with some metallic black, and it's pretty much ready for me to apply the decal. I did put a small guideline, you can't really see it, with a ballpoint pen, and that's where I'm going to match the bottom of this up with. And these are pretty hard to apply just because of the way that they curl. So I'm going to start with the bottom here. I'm just going to peel this back to about here. Make it as even level as possible. I'm going to match this up with my edges. I drew in the ballpoint pen. Starting from the middle, I'm going to work it out slowly with my fingers to get it as even as possible. Simply and evenly roll this out. I'm working it out from the center to the edges. And when you work from the center to the edges, you help to ensure that you don't get any air bubbles. It's nice and flush and attached to the surface. I don't know how well you can see this on camera, but you can kind of even see that this is so flush that you can even see the lines of the wood grain pushing through the emblem itself. So now that's pretty much done, and I'm going to move on to the Plastidip texturing of the Batman stand. And to prep this for the gray Plastidip, I just took and I masked off the edges here, just using some regular old household masking tape I got at the dollar store. Okay, I've got my piece and my Plastidip here, and I'm going to go ahead and hold it pretty far away. I would say about 14-16 inches. I just want to speckle it. Not giving it a solid coat. Okay, set that level. You can see all the speckles and blobs on it, and when that dries, that should give it some decent texture. Part of the reason that I have laid it down is by leaving it standing up, this may run, and I don't want that to happen. So let's let that dry and come back to it later. And while the Plastidip is drying, this is pretty much done. I'm just going to hit it with some high gloss lacquer. You're going to put this on in very thin, light coats. Okay. Okay, I'm going to rotate it. Now that it's rotated, and I'm going to go ahead and let that dry for a few hours. First coat that I did dried, and I looked at it in the light. I decided I wanted some more texture, and I'd rather do several coats that are thin and light than one that's too heavy. So then I have to scrap the whole project. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a second coat with the gray Plastidip. Same as before, not too thick. I'll lay it flat and then let this dry just like the other one. Alright, I removed the masking. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint the edge with some plain acrylic craft paint that is black. And then we'll be ready to apply the decal. Right, I'm going to use the lacquer now that I've applied the emblem. You can see the texture showing through here on the vinyl cutout. Go ahead and lacquer this in the same manner as the other one. Okay, I'm going to let that dry and then give it one more coat, and then we'll come back and check out and see how they look with the figures once they're all done. Okay, here is the completed and lacquered Batman base. Over here I already have K2 standing up on his base. And I did have one slight problem, that this side started to curl up and become unattached. So I had to use some contact cement and reattach it. I'm thinking it's probably because the vinyl doesn't want to stick to the wood as well, even with the paint on it. But I had no issues whatsoever over here, and this adhered perfectly, and I think that possibly has something to do with the fact that I plasti dipped it first. So keep that in mind whenever you're making these. But let's see here. There is the completed figures on their bases. And overall, I'm happy with how this turned out. Since it's the end of the day, each of these only cost about $8 to $10 worth of materials. And you get it down to the cost of the individual pieces and raw goods to make this. It turned out pretty well. So hopefully this video helped you guys and helped give you some ideas to make something cool. And I hope you enjoyed watching this.